Bones, bones, bones. They're inside us and under us, and one day we will become them. But the bones we're talking about specifically today is a show that is all about what goes on with those bones, and what they can tell us about how someone gets brutally murdered in a way that will speak to some larger themes between the two main characters, FBI agent Booth and Dr. Brennan. See, Booth is the more spiritual Christian one of the group, while Brennan is the analytical, somewhat seems to be coded as neurodivergent scientist. And with their powers combined, they're able to communicate with people and identify evidence to solve a crime. They're aided in these efforts by the squad of people at the Jeffersonian Institute Medico-Legal Lab, a group that is called the Squint Squad after a derogatory term that Booth used to refer to the labbies in the pilot episode.
It's a term that I never heard of until we started the pilot, and they're always down squinting.
In this squad is Angela Montenegro, a forensic artist whose job is reconstructing the faces of those killed, and to be bisexual. Dr. Zach Addy, another doctor specialised in forensic anthropology, and who also isn't in the episode we're talking about because he maybe helps a serial killer do stuff in season 3. Dr. Jack Hodgins, who specialises in mineral and spore examinations, and who is secretly very, very rich. Dr. Camille Sarayan, who runs the whole forensic division, and used to date Booth, which causes some tension between her and the team. Lance Sweets, a psychologist whose job is to profile the group and be the human side of the organisation to counter the spiritual side and the science side. And that's the lot. So that's the general idea of the show. Those are all the characters going on, and today we're going to be talking about Season 4's episode 23, The Girl in the Mask, and its ramifications upon gender presentation and transgender identity. Oh, and also how it gets super duper fucking racist. Yeah, strap in. This is gonna be a rough but necessary one to our grander understanding of how shows handled these kinds of gender binary breaking narratives. Well, the episode begins with Booth and Brennan at a diner, discussing the potential new hires for the forensic department as is their wont. I mean, if people are not here for the partner dynamics and relationship connections between the two main people in a detective series, then that detective series is gonna be very short-lived.
Plus, you know, he's somewhat normal.
Well, that's what you like. Vincent is the most intelligent.
Well, that's what you like.
All of this fun little stuff before Booth gets a call from an old friend slash workmate of his, Sergeant Nakamura, or as Booth calls him, Naki with the sake. Yeah, that's probably more genial than racist. I'm hoping it has a reference to an event that happened between them, like Nakamura brought him some sake, and then Booth called him Naki as a nickname, and it all just came together in a way that I hope Nakamura was on board with. Because, you know, a lot of, especially people from different countries, get their names shortened or get their names completely changed to a Western name because Western people can't be bothered learning to pronounce what are ultimately relatively easy to understand and pronounce names. Regardless, Nakamura has a problem. That problem being that his sister has not called in 5 days, and he's worried, especially because she normally calls every day. So he's trying to call in Booth as a favour to get his expert help on tracking her down, especially because Nakamura is stuck in Tokyo and his sister went missing in Washington DC. Booth then sets up a call with the local police department to find out if Sachi has had any weird shit tied to her in the past few months, and explains to us how he went on an exchange to the Tokyo PD for a bit a few years back, and that's how he knows Nakamura.
When were you in Japan?
A few years ago on an exchange program with the Tokyo police.
And that he is a little bit dismissive of Nakamura's worries because Nakamura is overprotective due to having raised his sister effectively all by himself. The call reveals that there was a car linked to Sachi that was found abandoned by the salt marshes, and that this is a popular place to dump a body, Which leads us to the next scene as Booth and Brennan turned up to the scene of the car getting towed. It also being at night now, so I guess they drove a long time to get to the salt marshes? I have to assume that cut between these two times would imply that, but I also have Google Maps, and they specifically said where it was, so give me a second, I can figure this one out. So, they were in Washington DC, driving pretty close to the Capitol building as we can see in this shot, which places them around about here when they got the information, somewhere between Lincoln Park and Pennsylvania Avenue based off the angle of the Capitol building. Yeah, trust me, I wasted a lot of time on figuring this one out. Unfortunately, a place called Tilbrook Salt Marsh doesn't exist. Presumably so they don't give a real salt marsh a bad name, but the closest salt marshes I could find are on this peninsula over here, shared between New Jersey and Maryland, which would be anywhere between an hour and a half or 2-hour drive to get to, especially if you've turned on the old police lights. Now here's the thing. We know for a fact that Nakamura is in Tokyo, and it is nighttime in Tokyo, probably around dinner time or maybe a bit later based on the business of this street vendor. I'm saying it's probably not like 5 AM or something, right? I think at the latest we could say from the busyness it's 1 AM. Using the magic of time conversion from Tokyo to EST, we find that the only available times that this call could have taken place in Washington DC are between 8 AM and around 1 PM. Now, I checked the times for when Washington DC goes dark, because remember, we need for it to be dark when they turn up at this salt marsh. A salt marsh which also presumably would need to be in the local area for them to drive to it in any reasonable time. Also, the local PD was able to find it so quickly, which made me assume it was in their databanks. I mean, the police officer that meets Booth and Brennan at the scene of the car crime is wearing the Maryland PD outfit, which means it must be in that state.
Yeah, Detective Frame told me to wait on you before I had this vehicle towed.
Now, regardless of where the salt marsh actually is, if it's in Maryland, it is at most a 2-hour drive away from the location we had them pinged at in Washington DC. But back to that time thing, you see in this part of the world, at the earliest it would be getting dark around 4:45 PM, and that's December the 8th, the darkest part of the year in the Western Hemisphere. Now, I was also able to check the temperature at that time, and on average over the last decade or so, you're looking at about a very chilly 6 degrees Celsius or 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, looking at the clothing and the way that they're breathing cold air / Brennan puts on some gloves when they exit the car, I'm willing to accept that this might very well be one of those cold days. Though, good lord, they must all be really, really cold because I feel like you should be wearing a lot more for 6 degrees Celsius. In that kindest of possible interpretations though, wait, hang on a second, why isn't there cold air coming out of Nakamura's mouth when we see him in Japan then? Japan is also Northern Hemisphere and experiences the same cold months that the Americans do, and it's the middle of the night in Tokyo, which puts the temperature at around about 4 to 5 degrees Celsius or 32 to 36-ish degrees Fahrenheit, which means it should also be cold as shit over there. Look, I'm willing to accept that there might be extenuating circumstances for that one, but in this most kind of interpretations, let's accept that things get dark at 4:45 PM, and that it's a 2-hour drive to this salt marsh. Now, that would mean that if they drove there straight away, something that is implied by turning the damn police lights on and looking all serious when they do it, they would have to have left at about 2:45 PM for them to get there when it was dark, or starting to turn dark. Realistically, it should be a lot later, but we're being nice here. However, as we established, the latest time that they could realistically be is sort of 1 PM. I mean, I checked, and most places are not open beyond 1 AM in Tokyo, and it certainly would not be as busy as shown in this shot. It is a big city, but this is like peak side street business. I mean, it's a lot of assumptions, but effectively, under these current circumstances, it would mean that Booth and Brennan spent almost 2 hours futzing around after lunch before deciding to then actually drive over to the spot. I guess they turned on the lights to get to the shopping mall faster or some shit. Also, I'm still being charitable because 1 PM doesn't translate to 1 AM in Japan, it translates to 2 AM. So I'm already giving them a fair bit of leeway in time. Though for all of this to make sense, they would need to be talking to Nakamura at about 2:30 to 2:45 PM, which would mean almost 4 AM in Tokyo, which just doesn't seem that logical, all things considered. Regardless, none of this is getting us close to the trans part of the fucking episode, but it is one of those tangents that I know people have been desperately wanting to come back, so there you go. We finally found something that my brain got stuck on and could not process and move past. In the swamp, Brennan and Booth get the deets on the car, and find that there is blood in it. That Sachi's roommate has also gone missing, another young Japanese woman in a similar situation, and Brennan then just kind of wanders into the swamp a little bit and finds a creepy mask that nobody else noticed.
No, it's some kind of mask.
Okay, Bones, come on, get out of there.
And under that mask, you might ask? Well, that's a dead person. It's a horrifying human skull. But there's your mystery. We got the body. We got the maybe who. We just need to work out the why and the what now. Ain't you excited? And as to our mystery, I can tell you right now that the trans character or trans character of the episode has not in fact turned up yet. It's not like secretly Nakamura or his sister. However, we do also get our first little bit of what I want to call TV show racism, wherein the first thing that happens when Brennan says that the mask is Japanese in design is this very, let's call it questionably Eastern musical sting occurring and building.
This mask appears to be Japanese in design.
You don't need to do that. It's really not necessary. Like, imagine if any time someone said NASCAR, some country music started playing. Or if you found a body from Seattle, you heard Nirvana crop up. It's a frankly weird and somewhat insulting thing that whenever anything Eastern, and I mean Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, whatever, turns up, Western editors and producers will do the same goddamn fucking noises for all of them. India gets its own racist noises to indicate that culture's appearance, so good for them I guess, but everyone else in that sort of sphere gets a kind of generic one. Sorry, it's one of those minor things that pisses me off in a major way, because how completely not needed it is to establish anything. Regardless, we're off to the credits now, with the cool techno-electronica beat. Back at the lab, the scientist people discuss a bunch of stuff about the skull, specifically that they know it's from a woman, but they can't really pinpoint much else from it. And then we meet Nakamura in person, who flew out, I guess, to help investigate his sister's disappearance and possible death, as well as the character of interest for this episode, Dr. Haru Tanaka, a person who Bones knows very well because of Tanaka's expertise in age estimation of ribs, and whatever, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, I'm a trans sociologist.
Of second, fourth, and eighth sternal rib end variations related to age estimation. It was brilliant.
However, all we get here immediately is the fact that Haru Tanaka is a visually ambiguous person in regards to Tanaka's gender identity, as well as Tanaka's voice being both deep, but also having feminine aspects too. But more importantly, they also have cool as fucking shit hair. Like, no kidding, Tanaka looks awesome. The hair, the piercings, the outfit, that is some serious style that I think most trans people can probably click with just off the bat.
Honored to meet you. Everyone in the field accepts that you are the best.
We find out that Tanaka and Nakamura are going to be helping the investigation despite it being against protocol. Booth allowing this because it might very well be Nakamura's sister, and also because Nakamura is his friend. And Brennan going along with it because she wants to work with Dr. Tanaka. And as they all do respectful bows, there have been a lot of bows in this scene so far, that goddamn fucking music starts playing again.
I would enjoy working with Dr. Tanaka.
Get out of here! Shoo! Shoo! We fucking get it. The Japanese. The bowing is a Japanese sign of respect. We understand. You don't have to play the goddamn music. And on the bowing, it is actually being done when it should be getting done, at the start and the end of the conversation, out of a sign of respect from Brennan to these two, and she also does a deeper bow to Tanaka to indicate that respect further, something which sort of makes sense for a character who I can only describe as, God, I think they might be autistic.
Dr. Brennan is cold, distant, and alienating, Your Honor.
Hey!
I want my bones. Did you find my bones?
More skull investigations occur, and Tanaka/Brennan end up coming to the conclusion that this skull does pretty reliably belong to that of Sachi Nakamura, which is obviously upsetting for her brother.
I'm very sorry.
Thank you. If you would excuse me.
I also, at this point, got really stuck on trying to figure out where the hell I know this guy playing Nakamura from, and so I went digging and found out it was Brian T, who played Tom Kobe in Starship Troopers 2 Hero of the Federation, as well as Nobura Mori in The Wolverine and Hamada in Jurassic World. He was also apparently in Buffy the Vampire Slayer at some point, which I don't remember, but is hardly a surprise considering that a lot of people were in Buffy at some point in their careers. Then, the fucking music comes back, as Nakamura storms away and then talks about his responsibility to keep his sister safe and how he's failed at that. Okay, look, I can't mention it every time it occurs. Just have this be known that anytime someone does something or says something related to Japan or is someone related to Japan, that music is gonna fucking play, and it only gets more irritable every single goddamn fucking time it happens. The rest of the gang gets to spend some time with Tanaka talking about the mask, as they educate them on what the mask actually is and means.
A cartoon character?
No, this is original, not representing any of the well-known characters.
Tanaka then quickly walks out when Sweets brings up psychology, declaring it to be a soft science, and annoying Sweets a bit with the dismissiveness, before Angela then asks the rest of the gang what their guesses are. The others, rightfully, take this to imply guesses on the case, because that would be the normal and reasonable thing to presume. But what Angela really means is whether they think that Dr. Tanaka is a dude or a dudette.
A doctor? Dude or dudette?
Oh god. Oh sweet god, no. That's right, the second mystery of this episode is the audience and the group trying to gender investigate this person who does not seem to care about these people knowing what gender they are. I mean, they might be non-binary for all we know. Maybe this will be a good opportunity to show up the expectations of these people by revealing this information to them and to us, and therefore establishing Bones as a progressive model of learning and education. When did this come out? 2009? Oh, yeah, never mind, we're fucked. That's not gonna happen. Also, hugely disappointing to see this kind of thing coming from the one bisexual member of the main group. Very let down here by Angela. You're a shame to the rest of the LGBTQ, okay? Go away.
Maybe I have, but I haven't changed nothing.
On the murder side of things, we find that the two missing Japanese women did some modelling work and got fired from it for going too sexual with the poster. Booth and Nakamura go to a hangout spot for young Japanese people and find them all dressing in extreme manners that are used to defy the traditional expectations of Japanese culture. Booth talks about Lolita shit for an uncomfortable amount of time, that amount of time being any mention at all.
What is with the Emma Loli girls? Never expected to see the sweet Lolitas here in the States.
And then Nakamura engages with the owner of this Papa Puff's place, Bruce Takido, and gets some information out of him that Booth would not have been able to do so. Bruce reveals that the girls were anime girls, meaning they dressed like anime characters, and that he fired them when they started working for an escort service and ignoring his warnings about that industry. God, it so often comes back to sex work, doesn't it, in these crime shows? It's no wonder people come out wanting to completely ban it and make it illegal, despite the fact that doing so wouldn't actually help a lot of sex workers, instead making it more dangerous by giving the people who engage in it no legal recourse or option. Bruce and Nakamura almost get into a fight because Nakamura refuses to believe that his sister would be a prostitute, and Bruce quite quickly grabs a nasty looking fucking cleaver, which thankfully Booth is there to stop this turning into a debacle. Dr. Tanaka spends some time with Dr. Sarian, observing her as she tests the tissue for gunshot residue, and we also find out that Tanaka would do anything for Nakamura, such as fly all the way with him to Washington DC to help him with a case. For me, implying some sort of romantic element that maybe is causing such loyalty and giving the audience more fuel to add to their expected gender confusion around Tanaka.
That's a very big favor to do Detective Nakamura coming all the way from Japan.
I would do anything for him.
On the other side of things, Nakamura spends some time with Brennan after getting a little bit too emotional in the field, and also the fact that the next stop for Booth was going to be that escort service that his sister worked at, which we already saw he had a pretty bad reaction to, so probably a smart idea.
I owe you for talking Booth out of sending me home.
Wasn't me.
During this conversation time with Brennan, Nakamura reveals that the rest of the FBI were kind of dismissive of the Tokyo police during that little exchange, trying to tell them how to run things. Well, only Booth listened and watched what Tokyo did before asking them for advice on what they would do for helping him. All of it trying to showcase how Booth is a nice guy who connects with people and also doesn't have a Western superiority complex, I guess. The rest of the people are still on the mask thing, while Angela is still on the Tanaka thing, Googling them to try and get more information on Tanaka's gender. We find out from Angela that during this Googling, there were tons of articles, but none of them had a personal gendered pronoun in them, which Jack Hodgins follows by just telling Angela to ask Tanaka what her gender is, which Angela responds to by saying that, well, it's a him, isn't it?
None with a personal pronoun.
Maybe we should just ask her.
Him.
You people.
Sweets tells them both how it's wild that they can identify the sex of a dead body, but are unable to tell the sex of a living person standing in front of them, and at this point, I want to kill all of them. Guys, it's pretty obvious from the articles and from the fact that Tanaka isn't revealing Tanaka's gendered pronoun that they don't want people to know or to have that information. So take that knowledge, process it through what we people call being an empathetic and reasonable human being, and stop fucking digging. Let a person have their identity without making a big deal out of having to discover what their real gender is. Oh god, I just realised how turfy and transvestigation-y this whole plotline actually is. Sweets, our reasonable human boy, uses this to tell the others though that Dr. Tanaka connects with a Japanese concept called kei, though from what I could find it's more commonly called genderisu kei, meaning genderless style, an aesthetic which also accompanies the people involved viewing themselves as genderless.
自分が周りの方からジェンダーレス女子って言われることに対しては全然嫌とも思わないし、むしろすごい嬉しくて。
Now, while this is not necessarily cross-dressing or being transgender, it does exist as a concept outside of the gender binary norms that many cultures practice. It represents a distinctly unique take on gender identity and its separation from norms/assigned identity based on sexual history that causes this to be aligned as a concept with transgender discussions around non-binary identity in the Western world. Though I want to make it very clear here, not the exact same, nor a direct allegory for one another. What I'm trying to get at here is that it's complex and diverse, and would require a sensitive, engaged look at Japanese culture to properly educate the audience on what it means, and how to engage with it, something that Bones doesn't really care for beyond Sweets mentioning the style, and then immediately leading into Angela and Hodgins arguing about what gender Tanaka really is. You see what I mean? Also, when I say Orientalist or fetish here, I mean the way that a lot of Western cultures view Eastern Asia as kind of a block, kind of mystical, spiritual land full of strangeness and weirdness that is very different to our own. It's not to imply that it's a real thing, it's just a Western perception thing. So, yeah, everyone here is missing the point. Missing the point so bad, and in a way that is both racist and transphobic. And hey look, I just justified my title of the video. Yay! I mean, Sweets is trying his best here to be a voice of reason, trying to tell the others that gender is just a concept, and that everyone should be adult enough to be able to separate that in their mind and accept Dr. Tanaka as what Dr. Tanaka identifies with. And thank you. Thank you, Sweets, for being a goddamn voice of reason and empathy and a role model of what the audience should be looking up to, despite the fact that the show often kinda dumps on you a little bit, to be honest. Also, Sweets, don't betray me by the end of the episode. Please don't ruin this. Please don't do something stupid. Because it's already bad enough when right here, everyone just ignores Sweets and continues gendering Dr. Tanaka anyways.
Doesn't really matter what he is.
She. What she is.
Pretty fun stuff, right? Pretty comedy moment to do. Totally not at all massively disrespectful. On the other side, Booth and Brennan go hunting down the pimp who runs the escort business. He's a really sleazy dude who got stabbed by that Bruce Taquito guy from earlier, which I think is probably part of that classic Bones thing they do, where the obvious suspect totally isn't the suspect, and the real one is some dude that we met in the first 10 minutes of the show. In this case, that would be Bruce, so keep an eye on that guy and let's see if my TV crime show instincts are right. The sleazy pimp puts the crime-fighting duo onto a different sleazy guy, a banker who regularly hires escorts and apparently is a bit rough with them, the last guy that Sachi's flatmate had been seen with before she also vanished, so off we go to see that man.
But Nozomi booked a client last Friday and I haven't seen her since.
In the labs, we learn some stuff about the bullet wound, we learn some stuff about the topography of salt marshes, all of which reveals that maybe Sachi didn't die how we thought she did, and the rest of the body is somewhere else, and the head got moved afterwards. Some very good boys working for the very bad boys find the rest of the frankly appalling looking corpse. Like, I get it, bodies don't look good, but goddamn does Bones make bodies really look rotten and fetid. They dig into the body to find out what else it can tell them, with Brennan telling Nakamura how strong he is to remain, but that he doesn't need to show that commitment if he doesn't want to, and that it would distract them from their work.
I'm sure you wouldn't want that.
Of course not.
As they liquefy the body, Tanaka calls out Dr. Sarian for the fact that she keeps trying to not so subtly stare at Tanaka, and Dr. Sarian awkwardly plays it off like she doesn't know what is going on and tries to distract from it, which is just super fucking weird behaviour. Like, hey, American team, maybe stop being such oddballs around the genderless character.
You were staring at me.
I didn't realize
How about that? Well, Tanaka then comments on the fact that Dr. Tanaka has noticed that a lot of people have been staring at them. And I will also say right here and right now that the usage of them to refer to Dr. Tanaka throughout this video is not an indication of gender identity. It is the abdication of one in the English language. And from the resources I have found, the usage of they/them is an acceptable form alongside just using the person's name when regards to translation. Brennan and Booth then track down the banker guy and talk to him in the middle of a massage that is apparently the start of a sexual massage, which is... ugh.
Right, she's not that type of masseuse, so... Nozomi Sato? Who?
But then the banker guy sends them to the next person in this conga line of fucking suspects. Though not before we get a wonderful little discussion about how this massage is one with a happy ending. That classic piece of, Orientalist perspective that views Asian massage parlors as a location in which to get sexual favors post the massage.
Well, and she's a happy ending masseuse, okay? Happy ending.
It's very shitty and it's based on a long-standing fetishization of Asian women by Western media. Thankfully, we interrupt this discussion on Western businessmen idolizing Japanese culture with Brennan torturing this dude to get information out of him in regards to an executioner's sword that he sold.
Hitting the iliohypogastric nerve can be extremely painful.
The same kind of sword that might have removed Sachi's head. Unfortunately though, we have to go from that scene to Angela and Camille discussing how Camille also didn't ask Tanaka what their gender is, and then calling them a he, she, he, while talking about the situation.
But he caught me staring. I didn't mean to.
They might not be transgender, but I do find that groups which break with gender norms end up sharing many of the same storylines, and we sort of see that effect here. Camille talks about how she just didn't know a way of asking the question without offending Tanaka. Like, what if she called he a boy, and they're a girl? Or she a girl, and they're a boy? And like, how the fuck did none of you understand the memo on genderless identity? Dr. Tanaka is not a boy, or a girl, or any of that. That's the whole fucking point. And asking the question at all when you know that information is immediately offensive.
Other way around, same thing. God, I miss the ease of a simple pronoun.
Yeah, tell me about it.
And then both of them commiserate over missing the ease of simple pronouns. I have never been so irritated at these characters, especially you, Angela. You should know better. Regardless of this, we find out that the photographer Mr. Strutt had been taking stalker photos of Sachi, and that maybe he had an obsession that makes him the real killer, though the time left in the episode gives me hope that it's still gonna be that Bruce guy from earlier. Dr. Tanaka then talks about the Shinto concept of kami while discussing the skull of Sachi. And at this point, you can probably assume what kind of style of music is fucking playing over this.
Forgive me, Dr. Brennan, but I must ask if you are familiar with the Shinto idea of kami.
Tanaka mentions that holding a bone sometimes gives them insight far beyond science, where they can tap into the spiritual side. All of which Dr. Brennan is a little bit hazy on, because Brennan has never been very good with the more religious, spiritual aspects of people. But Tanaka holds the skull, and figures out that Sachi was drowned thanks to the kami of the skull. Here's the thing. This can be played in ways that are very respectful, and Bones is certainly doing its best here to try and give Japanese culture a decent representation. But it's also just kind of doing every single thing that you would expect from a Western show stereotyping about Japan, including that idolization that places some kind of mystical power onto things that Japanese people get up to.
I often find that handling the bone gives me insight that pure science cannot express.
Like, positive magical stereotyping can still be racist if that makes sense. It's still part of this othering that sees them as different. God, I'm just getting bounced here between racially charged themes and gender-offensive themes. Really makes me miss the murder of a young woman.
The girl was drowned first, a mask was put on her, then she was decapitated, and her head was mounted on a bamboo stake.
We do get the summary of what has happened to Sachi so far in this line here, though, which is great to know, and we also get a very autistic scene from Dr. Brennan where she talks to Nakamura about the fact that he talked to his sister a bunch, and that he clearly loved her so much that his happiness is contingent on her. Something that Dr. Brennan doesn't feel, and isn't sure if she would want to feel after seeing the pain that it can cause.
If I was willing to give up my life for Sachi, why would I not be willing to risk my happiness for her?
The photographer dude from the start of the episode, rats. It could be him too, following the rules. It's always the first person you see in a case that's the murderer. Oh, I'm an idiot for forgetting the photographer guy. But anyways, the photographer guy gets challenged on his pictures, and we also learn that Sachi drowned in water from a water feature. Something which the photographer has, so things aren't looking great for him right now. Though he reveals that he does nude photo shoots and also sends girls to the pimp guy, cause I guess this photographer also sucks ass apparently.
All I do is give him names, man.
What names?
Names of girls who don't mind doing nude shots. All finder's fee.
However, he wasn't the killer, or at least the clues about him don't come through. And then the gang comfort Nakamura on the fact that his sister wasn't a prostitute, that it was just her roommate who was a prostitute, which is also kind of an offensive thing to say with regards to sex workers. So I guess this Bones episode is ticking so many boxes as possible. Like, trying to be like, oh, don't worry, she wasn't a sex worker, therefore she was a better person, I guess, is rude as shit.
I should have known the life she was living.
Listen, your sister wasn't a prostitute. Her roommate was.
Nakamura also informs us that this whole killing of Sachi was a warning to her roommate, that she was wearing her roommate's mask as a mimicry of a feudal Japanese custom to tell other traitors that they should be afraid. All of which, in Nakamura's eyes, doesn't tell us why Sachi got killed, if she was a good girl as people are implying here. I mean, it's still leaning into that whole thing that doing sex work makes you a bad girl and not doing it makes you a good girl, which is at best,
If Sachi was a good girl, what did she do to get killed?
Do we have any misgendering that we could be doing, or racist music that we could be playing instead of having to deal with this? I'm not really able to find much comfort here in this episode, I guess. Oh, there's the music, because of course it's here. There's a Japanese person on the screen. They bring the roommate in for questioning as she's trying to flee the country. Sweets talks to her about what happened and tries to find out information so they know who killed Sachi. However, the roommate seems way too traumatized by everything that happened to open up about it. We then get some super fancy blade recreation technology to figure out what knife removed Sachi's head, and we find out it looks like this, which Brennan recognizes as a marine knife, which leads them back to the owner of the pimp business because he owned a boat. However, this only proves that this guy removed her head, not that he killed her. And so the pimp guy tries to demand a deal, that in return for telling them who really did it, he would have to get off scot-free for his part in it.
You want me to cut you a deal?
Yeah, that's right.
Nakamura gets them to cut the deal so that they can find out who murdered his sister and make sure that person doesn't kill anyone else, that person being the banker guy from earlier, and fuck. That's not who I had my money on. He was introduced so late to the show. Why wasn't it Bruce? Where the fuck's Bruce been?
I couldn't allow that here. Families come here. It's not possible. It's true.
But yeah, apparently this banker accidentally drowned her. Well, intentionally drowned her in his koi pond, but didn't mean to kill her. Just meant to drown her a little bit for fun. And then all the other people in the supply line that got him his sex workers did their work to keep this banker guy clean. It frankly feels like this whole thing isn't a win, cause to get this guy they had to let the terrible pimp guy go free, and he was clearly sending the sex workers who worked for him into abusive and dangerous circumstances to make money. And on the note of a no-win situation in Bones, we have the resolution to the Dr. Tanaka story, where all the people who kept wanting to find out Tanaka's assigned sex talk about the fact that nobody ended up just asking them, and Sweets tries to remind everybody that they shouldn't be caring, that it isn't their business, and that it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the genderless identity that Tanaka has adopted to be so hyper-fixated on this. And well, that's not good enough for Angela, I suppose, who views this whole thing as ridiculous and decides to just go up and hug Tanaka while the rest watch on. The hug being a ruse that Angela is using to come back and tell us that it moved.
It moved. He's a guy.
What's the it? Well, it's Angela inferring that her hug was contact enough to stimulate Tanaka's penis, and that proves that Tanaka is a guy. Which all the people who are on the team guessing that Tanaka was a guy are super pumped about this, despite the fact that this is something that just breaks a whole bunch of workplace relationship rules as far as I'm concerned. Firstly, it's disrespectful of Tanaka's chosen identity and presentation, one that they have curated and developed within their own culture, and that gets challenged by these Western perspectives. Secondly, it's dismissive of Japanese cultural traditions. Across the board, Japan is not a huge believer in hugging. It's seen as strange and a more intimate gesture that you would not do with some random nobodies that you've just started working with. Seriously, look up the concept of skinship if you want some more info on that. It's pretty interesting and really important to be aware of when working alongside those from other cultures, you know, what their cultural traditions are and how to respect those. And finally, it's kinda just plain old sexual harassment. Angela deliberately positioned herself in such a way here that she was intending on touching and feeling Tanaka's genitalia, all of which is a big no-no. So that's this Bones episode in a nutshell. And while we have covered the time that Bones featured an actual Western trans person before, I felt it was important to cover this as well because it really does show how a lot of Western media fails when it comes to being respectful and accepting of other cultures and their attitudes towards gender non-conforming identities. Despite the fact that gender isekai is not a trans thing, there are trans people or those who identify as trans within it, of course, but across the board it is more focused on aesthetic and visual style / identifiers than it is on making determinations about someone's gender identity, this being something that makes a bit more sense in Japanese cultural history than that of Western history. We do still, however, see that gender isekai deals with, in this episode, the same kind of things that we can recognise as inherently transphobic, employing the same dismissiveness that people hold towards trans people, and the freeness with which others will violate trans bodies to figure out who they really are. It's also just couched in a bunch of racism as well. I want to briefly mention here, before we move on to my outro, that the actor for Dr. Tanaka in this episode was Ali Maki, a cis woman, which is interesting considering the fact that their ultimate determination was to go with the character being seen as a cis man by the invasive main characters. Ali Maki has talked on her role in this Bones episode, and discussed the way that the editing team lowered her voice in post-production to make her sound more masculine, as part of the androgyny, and keeping the audience guessing, as well as offering a take on the episode that is a little bit more positive, concluding that it's making fun of the Western people for their obsession with what gender Tanaka is. Which I could certainly believe if I hadn't just watched that final scene with the sexual harassment that leads to the main characters either looking sad that they guessed wrong or happy that they guessed right. Like nobody, not even Sweets, calls that out as highly inappropriate and something that should absolutely not have happened. And I gotta say that when I looked into reviews of this episode from 2009, such as this one from Entertainment Weekly, which described the fact that the Squints were even debating Tanaka's gender as ridiculous, considering that it was clear she was a woman, and that seeing the people celebrate Angela declaring that it moved was an enjoyable scene, I don't think anyone was getting the idea that this was inappropriate at the time, and that the gender obsession of the Western characters was wrong. Like, I think this was just a racist, transphobic epilogue that was meant to be funny and a joke. Anyways, with all that said, I think that's basically it for this Bones episode. And if you liked what I did here, or enjoyed my rambling, or just felt like I was a suitable accompaniment to whatever game you happen to currently be playing on the other monitor, or food you're cooking, or art project you're currently getting into, then please consider giving this a like, share, subscribe, and comment. You can also go and check out my other videos covering a huge array of different trans representation, and also a 4-hour video into Twilight and a 10-hour video into Harry Potter. I get special interest obsessed sometimes, what can I say? If you really like what I do here and want to support the channel, the best way to do that is on my Patreon or at Ko-Fi. The names of those in the $5 and up category should be scrolling past the screen right now. And I really appreciate everyone on there for helping to make this something that I get to do for a living. Things are a bit rough right now, as the channel is facing a bit of a trough as far as algorithm attention goes, so the people on my Patreon really are keeping the channel going, and letting me focus a bunch of attention on these trans videos / the big 15-hour Riverdale video series, of which part 1 should hopefully be coming out in either October or September.
Oh my god.
What?
Game changer. Archie got hot.
As it stands right now, if I could get that Patreon up to like $3,000 a month, that would cover all my expenses and allow me to easily keep doing what I'm doing rather than having to look for work at a time that really sucks in New Zealand for employment. So if you do have the money available, please consider supporting the channel, as it goes a long way to keeping it running. Huge thanks to all of those on there and on the screen for already doing so. Other than all of that though, thank you for watching this video, and hope you have a great day.